I think it is time. I can't think of any more reasons to stall. I said my hellos, I thanked everybody, and I believe we're good. So, now, without further ado, let's begin. I present my lesson on the Unabomber. In 5, 4, 3, 2... You know, before I begin, this would be the perfect time to announce my new project. It's a little something I've been working on, right? So I'm pretty excited I've been excited for. I think you're really going to like it. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you my new Minecraft Let's Play. Hey everybody, it's your boy D to the Octor, Dr. Pestis, DJ Pestizi, the Pestis that is the bestest, bringing you part 1 of the newest and hottest Minecraft content to hit Twitch. I got some straight fire heading your way, so stay tuned. We're going to take a look at the latest patch on New World. I already got one all ready for us, alright? We're going to start a New World. I got one ready for us. It's not just going to be any new world, it's going to be a brave new world. We're going to make the big bucks. I'm talking about hashtag gross domestic product. Let us load this up. You know, I think you guys are really going to like this, you know? So, let's take a look at our world right here. We got a force spawn. I'm pogging out, bro. Poggers? Can I get a poggers in chat? Oh yeah, we're 4 times away from hitting the goal for our Raid Shadow Legends sponsor. Type in !raid for the sign up link and you'll get extra starting gold when you make an account. Big ups to our sponsors Raid, G Fuel, GamerSups, NordVPN, and ExpressVPN. So let's go ahead and take a look at our Minecraft world. Poggers? Poggers? Yo, dude, Broheim, Broski, Brochacho, Brodio. We got some torches? Was that part of the last patch? Let's follow them. You know, I'm really excited, because I think we're going to do things. I got big plans, right? Big plans. The music. Dude, look! A cabin! Bruh. That must have been added to the biome gen last patch. Let's look inside. Maybe it'll have something good in it. Maybe it'll have some tools so we can get started, so we can, you know, get to the end really quickly. I want to kill the Ender Dragon really fast. Hey, look at this! Not too bad for a pre-made. You know, with villages, they're kind of like shabby, but this is looking pretty good. Hi, Flappy. Hi, Woozle. We got some books over here. What's on this side? Switches. Okay. Batteries. That's really just iron, but I guess it's flavor text. Sand? Question mark. TNT. Zinc. Saltpeter. Ammonium nitrate. And sulfur. I don't know why they're, like, mislabeled, but yeah, we got some, like, free mats. Repeaters, get some iron. Yo, look at all that iron! We can make some armor and all the tools we need right away. That's a lot of redstone. Dude, glowstone dust? We're gonna get fancy over here. That's a lot of TNT. We're gonna take all of this stuff. Yeah, and hi, Jones. Hello, Oxford, comma. Thank you very much for joining me today. Yo, 2 stacks of TNT, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And I skipped over this, but we've got an Ender Chest. Poggers? Thank you for the exclamation point raid, by the way, Flappy. I really appreciate it. We got an End Chest? Dude, this is like the sickest seed ever. I gotta, like, look at the seed later and see, like, what this is. What's in this? We got a book, alright? The Manifesto. Let's take a look at it. Maybe there's, like, new Minecraft lore? We're gonna get, like, connection to Minecraft dungeons, like Minecraft story mode? Let's take a look. What's this say? The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. They have greatly increased the life expectancy of those of us who live in advanced countries, but they have destabilized society. Have made life unfulfilling, subjected human beings to indignities, have led to widespread psychological suffering in the third world, to physical suffering as well, and have inflicted severe damage on the natural world. You know, this Minecraft lore is getting pretty deep. I really didn't think there was much tying it all together, but, you know. The continued development of technology will worsen the situation. It will certainly subject human beings to greater indignities, inflict greater damage on the natural world. What emoji mean by this? You know, maybe this is like something Notch left in. Maybe this is like unused Notch text. You think Notch could have written this? Yeah, I think Notch could have written this, and they're just like rehashing it or like reusing it around. You know, maybe that's. It would probably lead to greater social disruption and psychological suffering. And it may lead to increased physical suffering even in advanced countries, you know? Interesting stuff. They bring up some good points, don't they? You know, I really like this cabin. It even comes with a bed for us. So let's go ahead and take a little rest here and get our spawn point set up. I am... I would like to thank you all, first and foremost, for taking the time out of your lives and evenings to join me here. What we have tonight is a topic that might as well have faded into obscurity for many people, or may not even have a need to be brought up in this modern age. Today, the topic of our discussion will revolve around one person and the world around him. Some will know him as Theodore Kaczynski. Some will call him Ted. One person I know calls him Uncle Ted. I got his permission for this. Don't worry. And the rest will know him as the Unabomber. This will formally serve as the inaugural lesson for the lesson series I've wanted to do since I first began VTubing. And Calavera, I did it for me. We're going to make this very clear. I do all of this for me. There have been lessons on the history of torture, lesson on cannibalism, and a lesson on fingerprinting. But this marks a true beginning. I've thought long and hard about the subject matter and subsequently the title for these should be. As you may have seen for the promotional images and advertising for the stream, I welcome you to Lesson 1 of Understand Evil. Now, why evil? Why choose the wide umbrella of evil to feature as a representation of what I want to do, and the type of VTuber I want to be? It has entirely to do with not what I like, but what I seek out. I seek to know the world beyond the veil. I want to see what people normally avert their gaze from, and as such, that is what I want to share with you all. And there comes an issue with this I need to address. Those that enjoy this sort of thing may be familiar with a YouTube channel with a similar theme. The Vile Eye and their video essays titled Analyzing Evil. I thought about ways I could angle what I call this away from that so as to avoid confusion, not step on any toes, and avoid accusations of copycatting. I think Understand Evil is distinct enough in its core purpose and practical differences. In the first place, and most noticeably, the subject matter is separated between reality and fiction. I only plan to deal with the harsh and undiluted truth of the world. Vile Eye deals in the fabricated world of media. None of the people and their acts discussed therein in the world, as depicted as in the portrayal. I will touch on the unfortunate truth. Second, much of their analysis is done through interpretation and theorizing, as is natural for analyzing original works of media. I plan to work with cited sources only. My thoughts on the matter will largely fall to the wayside, but my hand will steer the course of the ship. We will talk about what I want to talk about, for this is my domain and my alone. And lastly, we must understand the difference between understanding and analyzing, at least in this regard. For characters derived from fiction, there is nothing to understand. They are constructed, crafted to fulfill a purpose. Perhaps as an opponent, a plot device for the protagonist to be beset by, maybe as a foil or contrast. A story with no antagonist is a hard sell in many cases. These fictional characters are designed to be lovable in how much you hate them. Or, maybe, to gain your respect for how much disdain you may hold in your heart. Or, even as bait for certain demographics to fawn over. Yeah. So, there's any number of reasons to design a character such as this. But the nature of reality is much more curt. Motivations are born of a darker, more incomprehensible place. There is nothing lovable about the evil that occurs here. Whatever respect there may be is morbid, and said with downturned eyes and regrettable solemnness. Before we get any further, we have to discuss the restrictions and limitations I will be setting for tonight's stream. Regardless of your opinions of the platform or the way it is run, we are, in most cases, beholden to the rules and guidelines we have agreed to in order to give ourselves an orange crate to proselytize from. Taken from the violence and threat section of the community guidelines page, this is the relevant section that will act as our guiding yet restrictive hand. Twitch does not allow content that depicts, glorifies, encourages, or supports terrorism, or violent extremist actors or acts. This includes threatening to or encouraging others to commit acts that would result in serious physical harm to groups of people or significant property destruction. And here's the important bit for us. You may not display or link terrorist or extremist propaganda, including graphic pictures or footage of terrorist or extremist violence, even for the purposes of denouncing such content. As some may already know, Kaczynski has written a daunting manifesto infamous in its length and content. As illuminating as it would be to examine this work, we will not be able to show or quote passages from it. Am I being overly cautious and possibly misinterpreting the intention behind the rule? It's plausible. I considered throwing apprehension to the wind and going shotgun gung-ho about this, but that doesn't fit my image of what I imagine a respectful scholar to be. That's pontificating. Instead, much like how we observe the abyss of a black hole, this day we'll discuss the world around the man. So, the question is, like Darkness Hazard says, how do I discuss this man who is by every definition a terrorist? His values are extreme, and critical of the modern world we all inhabit by nature of being here in this stream. His actions are reprehensible and without redemption. And yet, he remains as an important figure as we discuss the evolution of morals and the place technology has in our society. It is true to some degree. We are entirely more interconnected. The globe is much smaller than it was 100 years ago. Adapt to the adoption of technology or be left behind and trodden over. The passage of time is both slow to a halt and sped up faster than can be imagined. And for all of this development, people are more distant than ever. If you read literature from the 19th century, it paints a vastly different picture of how people communicated and socialized. And hello, Square Cactus. Thank you very much. In such a short time compared to the whole swath of human history, we have changed. Now, back to the topic of today. Before we break down and analyze any specific aspect of this topic, whether the man, his message, or the effects, we need to look at what exactly happened. That's why this section will be a factual account of the events that comprise the world of the Unabomber. Our sources will come directly from the FBI.gov website. We will get into interpretations and extrapolations later. Hello, thank you very much, Jenny the YouTuber. Welcome in everybody. We have just begun our section on the Unabomber, starting with the bombings. I hope you're all ready for this, and I hope everybody is prepared. Now, to note, I'm not interested in additional theories at this time. All we are to hear about comes from the FBI and the account of FBI agents. I'll touch on that, Artificer Joni. Now, we begin with the event that began his 17-year terror and bombing spree. The date is May 20... Oh, yes, there's 10, in case you were wondering. The date is May 25th, 1978. We travel to a parking lot in Chicago as the first scene of his attacks. Not just any parking lot, mind you. University of Illinois, Chicago Circle campus. There, a package was found by a passerby near a car, already addressed and stamped. Not mailed, even though it had $10 worth of uncancelled stamps on it. Well, being a good Samaritan, the package was returned to the person on the return address. One Professor Buckley Christ, Jr. at Northwestern University. Professor Christ did not recognize the package bearing his name and called campus security. You know, an odd package. No preceding event to make one suspicious of such a thing, right? The package was opened by the security officer and it exploded, wounding them. Someone had to do it, right? Now, we get a little insight from the FBI into a little mystery surrounding this initial event. The task force pondered a question I alluded to in my description of these events. Can anyone think of or tell me what inconsistency or unusual detail there was here? Any guesses about what was odd about this? It was pretty obvious, but, you know, it's one of those things where it's so simple and makes so much sense that you wouldn't just immediately think about it. Found a package, returned it, with his name. The odd matter I'm referring to here is the nature of how the bomb was presented and delivered. The stamps, no return address, close, pretty much. You had this package all ready for mailing, postage all prepared. It was just found on the ground in the parking lot. My source says there was even a mailbox not far away. Why was it found on the ground? Well, Terry Turchi, former Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI, says he threw out the idea the bomb simply wouldn't fit in the mailbox. The 1993 task force consulted postal records on that 1978 size of that Chicago mailbox and recreated the dimension of that packaged bomb. Their experiment showed it would not fit in the box. And so, now you understand. Our account has to start with the man. Theodore Kaczynski is a smart man, an intelligent man. It doesn't get you everywhere, though, right? I don't say this out of respect, but the correct picture of him has to be painted to avoid falling into those pitfalls of demented, cackling villain. No, not that easy. He was specifically a mathematician, one good enough at that to gain admission to Harvard at 16 years of age. Kaczynski would later go on to get his PhD and take up an educator's role teaching a short stint at the University of California, Berkeley. As in 1971, he moved to Lincoln, Montana, where he lived on a small area of land he purchased. Here, he would live off the land. It would function as his home base for operations and manufacturing. Some of his mathematics works is still referenced to this day. I believe it. I'm not up in, like, mathematics research, but mathematics, like we'll talk about later, is just a very black and white thing. There is no morality attached to mathematics, in most senses. So, we have this mailbox, right? they showed it would not fit. The theory would be later confirmed after a search of his cabin revealed a manila envelope containing admissions and confessions to all 16 crimes in detail. And hello, Asher, right? In one of these notes, he says, I was finally ready to begin my bombing campaign in May of 1978. I had everything ready. I did a great job. I get on the bus. I go to Illinois. I cover myself. No one knows I'm out there. I get out there, and my bomb doesn't fit in the mailbox. Re-emphasizing, Kaczynski's intelligent man doesn't get you everywhere. It's a common sentiment that in serial acts like this, the actions are unrefined and become honed over time. If you're familiar with true crime or have an ear to those types of things, one point that's commonly brought up is how often perpetrators begin close to home or places they know for a sense of security before expanding outwards. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the Chicago, Illinois area. I left a little detail of Ted's history. He was born in Chicago. The task force as well developed a theory that the bomber knew Chicago area well and may have lived there, so good on them. That's why they get paid the big bucks and get the funding. Now, at this stage in time, he is quiet for a year. One could reasonably take this as a one-off act of violence or aggression. You know? Just one time. It was a bomb. But May 25th, 1978. The second bomb would come now. May 25th, 1970 was the first bombing. The second would come at May 9th, 1979, almost a year later. This time, the victim would be a graduate student at Northwestern University. He opened a box that was left in a room used by grad students. The bomb looked like a present this time around. The student ended up injured. Now, hold on. 2 instances isn't much to base a pattern off of. But if you were tasked to give a name to this, you could call it the university bombings or the university bomber. Maybe the Unbomber or UN bomber, the Uni bomber. That makes sense. Uni bomber, UN bomber. That is until our next event. This time, there wouldn't be a year to wait. The time now is cut in half to a 6-month period. November 15th, 1979 is the date of the third bombing. This time the target is not a university or any single person. It would be an airplane in flight. American Airlines Flight 444. Good deal. Traveling from Chicago to Washington, D.C., has the bomb detonate in the luggage department. This had the potential of bringing down the airplane and killing a large number of people in transit, as well as those it would crash down on. Thankfully, the device malfunctioned. There was no devastating explosion, only smoke. The plane would land safely, although several passengers suffered from smoke inhalation. Musa Monk, we are going to talk about that, and if you still have questions at the end, I'll feed those. But I think it'll become pretty apparent. So, failed airplane bombing. Thank goodness, otherwise, well, I won't comment on, like, the rest of American history, but we could have gotten those TSA restrictions a lot earlier if it did. And now we could need to speak of names. The name is infamous, but this is a lesson for those seeking knowledge, so I'll go over the simple explanation of it. The Unabomber was designated so because universities and airlines were the targets of his early bombs. University and airline bomber. The Unabomber. That's where it comes from. Not Uni, but the Unabomber. In case you were needed to spell that out sometime. Yeah, yeah. So there it is. Ah, yeah. So that was number 3. Number 4, 7 months later. And hello, welcome in, welcome in. The target was a specific man this time around. No, just general, send it and see where it goes to. Specific target. Percy Wood, the president of United Airlines. The bomb was encased in a copy of the book Ice Brothers by Sloan Wilson. Now he's singling people out. No fatality, although he was injured. At this point in time, I'm going to go a little bit more quickly through the events in the interest of time and word count. The next 3 will be university targets over the course of 2 years, one of them actually being detonated safely with no injury. That brings us to the year of 1985. You'll notice that until this point, there had been some time between bombings, maybe a year or 6 months. 1985 was a tough year. In this, there were 4 bombings, one again being safely detonated, but the last one on December 11th, claiming the first life in the Unabomber spree. Bomb number 11, left in the parking lot of Rentec Computer Store, a Sacramento, California business, kills the store's owner. A computer store owner. Let me go off script here. Of course, I don't support any of this, but I find this especially distasteful. People in positions of power accept some degree of disdain. Not this much, but some, right? If I become head of some environmental agency or the CEO of a tech company, I expect some animosity. But to target a common member of the general populace, he's just a business owner trying to earn an income and support a family. It's a sin to kill a mockingbird. I'll leave it at that and move on. There would be another bomb 15 months later in Salt Lake City at a strip mall called Cam's. This would be a significant Unabomb event. Here is where a witness, an employee of the store, sees a man leave the bomb and leads to the composite sketch of the culprit. A very famous picture that you may have seen, if not only for what I put in my promos. The bomb would take the appearance of a board with nails protruding from the top, similar to the one that killed the previous victim. The store owner's son pulled into the parking lot and touched the device. It sent him to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. And then, possibly, something just as possibly terrifying in another vein. The deafening sound of nothing. He leaves the bomb next to a car wheel and disappears. 6 years of silence. Some people thought he had died. Reasonable, right? Play around with bombs enough, and maybe something happens. His return was frightful. After 6 years of inactivity, bombs 13 and 14 would go off within 2 days of each other. On June 22nd and 24th in 1993, injuring a geneticist at the University of California and a Yale computer science, respectively. The computer scientist would lose several fingers. In the next year, on December 19th, 1994, he would claim his second death when an advertising executive is killed in his New Jersey home when he sent a package bomb. Number 15. The final bomb, bomb number 16, comes 4 months later when a package mailed to the Sacramento office of the president of the California Forestry Association kills him. He's getting much, much better very, very quickly. But that was the final bomb. And that is the account of the Unabomber. 16 bombs, 17 years of terror, 23 injured, and 3 dead. So now you know we have a baseline on what exactly he did. We need to understand that before we talk about the things we're going to talk about. And so, now you know remedial understanding of the bombings that terrorized a nation and consumed government minds. The next section is going to focus on the beginning of Kaczynski's downfall. We're focusing on none other than... Can you read this? Linguistics. This is International Phonetic Alphabet for anybody wondering. We are talking about linguistics. How did we come to this? If this situation sounds bleak or frustrating, it entirely was. The task force began reorganizing and reinvestigating each bombing after his return. He even asked everybody to partner up with each other and other task force members in the hopes they'd keep everybody's spirits up by bouncing ideas off of each other. They were that desperate to just, not fall into despair. The other disheartening thing was how unidentifiable the devices themselves were. According to FBI Special Agent Kathleen Puckett, this guy left practically no way to trace back any evidence that was left at the scene. Parts of bombs, components, or anything else. He was a real cipher. There were no fingerprints, no hair, no fibers for the profiling unit to utilize. Even some components were not able to be traced, either because they had been stripped, like the batteries, or they were just so banal. Look, and a lot of the wood and different things just looked like junk that was picked up by the side of the road. He's not working with exclusive materials that only the highest level of clearance get to. He's working out of stuff that you can get at the hardware store. The 9th bomb, sent to the Boeing Fabrication Division in Washington, was safely detonated, but still lost most of the forensic evidence. So, there comes a challenge in profiling this figure. His location, motivations, method of choosing targets. How to figure this out. Who else would be so kind as to give the FBI a break as the Unabomber himself? The beginning of getting insight to the identity of the Unabomber came from a letter he sent to the New York Times in 1993. The letter said, essentially, "We are an anarchist group. We are the anarchist group FC, Freedom Club, if you're wondering, or maybe the other kind of FC. I don't think this kind of FC, but, we're still going to keep this on the table, keep it on the pinboard. We are the anarchist group FC. And by the time you receive this, something significant will have occurred." And then what fascinated me was the statement, "if nothing goes wrong." And I thought, okay, this is the caution. This is the very careful preparation. He's older. He's more speculative. He's more controlled than we initially might have thought he was. This is important to note as the new revelation ran counter to what early profilers had thought. My NPR source says for years, they felt the Unabomber was college age, around 18 to 23 years old. Angry at universities? Yeah, that sounds reasonable for a disgruntled student. But the truth was always off by about 10 years. And a measured analysis is always warranted when dealing with the words of those under suspicion and who cannot be trusted. There was no group, no organization called FC. He was a lone wolf. Look, despite what he'd written, they knew the bomber was not part of a group. No group could stay that tight, that undetectable for so many years. And now summer of 1995 is where the story hits its climax. Kaczynski reaches out to the media again and says that if his writings are published, he will stop the bombings. This would be a long, 35,000-word essay. Industrial Society and Its Future. The Unabomber Manifesto. This was a wealth of information for the FBI to build a profile before they even did anything with it. Let's look at some examples of what exactly built his linguistic profile. Some are simple, and the FBI used simple computational methods to analyze word frequency and spelling variance. Analyze was used for analyze. See? License, license. Willfully, willfully. Installment, it makes less sense if you're just listening, but there's, the spelling. And so, let's look. And some sayings and idioms were inverted, like, you can't have your cake and eat it too became, you can't eat your cake and have it too. You know, I don't know about you, but if I spelled these like I would on an elementary school spelling test, I would have gotten them marked wrong, but he's the math genius, so whatever. And the manner in which we talk betrays us all without even realizing it. They were able to find terms that dated the Unabomber and age him. Word choice like broad and chick to refer to women, and the 5-letter word to refer to African Americans. Remember, this is 1995. My source says it sounded like it came out of the 50 movies or something, or like something like what Frank Sinatra would say. Furthermore, they were able to place him in the Chicago area based on his terminology. A linguistics professor, Roger Shuey, thought he had roots in Chicago to language reflective of several local newspapers throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s. All this information was beginning to align and form his profile, and that'd be important for getting a search warrant later. Now, let's get back to the manifesto and the Unabomber Task Force, the Unabomb Task Force. Here is the million-dollar question. Are you ready? Final answer? Do you publish this? There's a promise to stop bombing and possibly save lives if you do. You do it? It's not an easy decision. The FBI's answer was originally, no. We don't give in to terrorists. The promise of ceasing activity and bombings was the first reason. Kathleen Puckett thought the promise was hollow. She did not believe the Unabomber would stop or could. And the second reason here is that the manifesto was incredibly unique. We know the ending here. The writings are what made the case. Somebody would recognize this. Because first of all, the writings were very passionate, and it was obvious that there's no question this man really believes in what he's writing here. So he probably held these beliefs his entire life. And so that became the basis to put that into the mix. They made the decision to publish the manifesto with the goal and hope that somebody would recognize this. The writing style, the ideas, and the beliefs contained therein would stand out to somebody, and they could come forward to help point the investigation in the right direction. Industrial Society and Its Future was published September 19th, 1995, as a special section within the Washington Post. And now just, fingers crossed, somebody might possibly see this and call into the Unabomber tip line, Oh, I hope somebody will call in. Fingers crossed. 50,000. They received over 50,000 calls in the 6 months between publication and February 1996. There was indeed a hit, a result that made all the efforts, risks, hours, and manpower worth it. A few months later, a lawyer contacted the FBI. They would be representing one David Kaczynski. He would go on to provide a 23-page essay his brother, Theodore Kaczynski, wrote in 1971. The resemblances jumped out at the agent immediately. One noticeable phrase in this essay was the sphere of human freedom. Referring back to the manifesto came up with this line: "We are going to argue that the industrial technological society cannot be reformed in such a way as to prevent it from progressively narrowing the sphere of human freedom." More and more began to align and fall in place as we previously went over. Theodore Kaczynski would become Unabomber suspect number 2416. Yeah, 2416. My auditions for Les Mis will come back another time. And so, that is the tale of the linguistics behind everything. You know what? Let's get some sound back. I think we're past the more somber part, at least for now. Over 2K suspects seems a bit much. This was probably the most hated man in the United States at the time. 17 years is a long time to amass a suspect list. And now, what comes next could easily be described in a few sentences. They obtained a search warrant with the information they had. Nothing warranting an arrest yet. Hello, Aegon. Welcome in. You're just in time for the FBI to open up. I hope everybody is prepared for this stream. And so, we could sum this up easily. They obtained a search warrant with the information they had. There's nothing warranting an arrest yet of Theodore Kaczynski. They looked through his cabin and found damning evidence, and the rest is history. But we've come this far. No reason to let our tale end with such a fizzle. We're going to look at an article from Time magazine, one that came out only 12 days after Kaczynski's arrest. Hello, Flyer, welcome in. Retrospectives are nice. They're very good, we need them. But we're going to travel back in time to that period, where triumph perfumed the air, and the mood was electric with finally bringing an end to a 17-year spree of terror. To set the stage... I got them, don't worry. To set the stage, we have to take a trip to the past while remaining here in the present. We aren't going back in time, but we have to go to a place nearly untouched by the modern world, free from all the lights and wires that are pervasive in the today we inhabit. We have Lincoln, Montana. Lincoln is close to the largest tract of unbroken wilderness in the continental United States. It is here you can truly see what the people from hundreds of years ago saw. Trees hundreds of feet high, hundreds of years old. You can hear the call of birds, and a lack of people and their conveniences. Well, mostly, because at this point in time, nature has been secretly corrupted. Microphones and sensors cover the forest listening in. Agents take up their disguises, masquerading as postal workers, lumberjacks, and mountain men. Snipers take up cover not far from the cabin. There was even satellite surveillance watching this tract of land, an eye in the sky to watch for a man practicing explosions. One could argue that due to the efforts of Kaczynski, he brought more people and technology to this untouched place than it had ever seen in the world, in the history of the world. Oh, irony! Me on the right, my antlers. I had to actually Google lumberjack stripper to find that, so I hope everybody appreciates it. Now, as I said, they first took Kaczynski into custody, and then were able to get a good, long look at the cabin. The headquarters of the man who would take the title of the longest, most expensive hunt for a serial killer in US history. What would you expect to find in there but a veritable bomb factory? Various chemicals, wires, books on bomb making, hand-drawn diagrams, and notebooks detailing data and test results. The cache even included components bearing the unique signature of the Unabomber. Every bomb maker, experts say, develops a hallmark. He may loop wires in a certain way, or set his switches at a certain angle, or in this case, create his contraptions out of wood. And the agents feared booby traps. Scary. So even entering carried a risk in itself, and hello, Artman. Who's to say that an individual this unhinged wouldn't have a contingency plan to avoid capture should any law enforcement try to approach? The fears of a booby trap weren't totally unfounded when you see that they found a partially built pipe bomb. The FBI agents stopped the search after 24 hours when they found a live bomb wrapped under the bed with no name or address, possibly ready to be mailed out. Is the intro starting to make sense now? Yeah, that's why. Also, hey, real quick, you remember something? You remember that promise to stop the bombings if his writings were published? Yeah. No. Kathleen Puckett was all but certain. The promise to stop bombing was hollow. She did not believe the Unabomber would stop, or could. So, party foul, Kaczynski. You pinky promised. You can draw your own conclusions about how the Unabomber felt his chance of getting caught were. As I believe Picky said earlier, interesting that he had a diary, just confessions and accounts of all the bombings just written out. He had shelves of labeled bomb-making parts, so we're going to touch on this, but he has a very decent sense of narcissism, as you can probably guess by now. Containers are filled with bomb-making materials that were labeled. For those that didn't see clearly or understand the references, that is what the labels on the chest in the intro were. I took objects that were referenced to be in his cabin. Potassium chlorate, sodium chloride, sugar, zinc, aluminum, lead, silver oxide, piping, wire and batteries. Am I telling you readily available greens to make a... Moving on. Remember that one of the reasons the Unabomber was so elusive and hard to pin down was that his building materials were readily accessible and near impossible to trace the origin of. The bomb squad cops had always said they were looking for a junkyard bomber. Sorry, junk. Because his inventions were patched together from lamp cords, bits of pipe, recycled screws, and match heads. As a note on this topic, Kaczynski was a man of contradiction when it came to his work. Batteries were scraped, stamps were used that were long past the issue dates, and he used wires that were out of production. He didn't leave fingerprints, and chemicals were widely available, very obfuscating. Yet, he also used distinctive handmade components when store-bought parts would have worked better and been harder to trace. He made switches that could have been bought at Radio Shack. Sponsors, I await your eager calls. This is what you can expect to, this is the way you can expect me to shill you. Take note, everybody. This is how you get the big sponsor deals. 。 He even had 2 walls of his space filled from top to bottom with Shakespeare and Thackeray among the bomb manuals. You recall the manila envelope mentioned earlier containing admissions and confessions to all 16 crimes in detail. That Thursday will belong to the FBI agents as they celebrate a few miles away from Lincoln at the 7-Up Guest Ranch, their temporary headquarters. I'm very proud of this joke, by the way. But for whatever weight you may ascribe to this endeavor, remember still, this was not to be taken lightly. By this time, they've had thousands of interviews, numerous suspects, and sifted over 20,000 calls to their hotline. In this article that came out just shortly after Kaczynski was taken into custody, the FBI still restrained themselves from saying they caught the Unabomber after everything they saw in that cabin, because the investigator's job is not just to prove that Kaczynski looks, talks, walks, and thinks like the Unabomber, but to show that he is the Unabomber. That means showing that he was in the right place at the right time to have concocted and delivered the bombs, that he never had an alibi, that he was never in jail or mental hospital when a bombing occurred. The journey doesn't stop here. Now, all the work of getting the pieces to fit has to be done. Records of his bus tickets out of Helena, Montana are run down, and the hotel he frequented there is identified. In California, agents do a crawl of the hotels in Sacramento and Berkeley, showing clerks pictures to try and place him around the timing of where the bombs were postmarked. You know, I really should have gotten that picture of "have you seen this?" You know, like one anime guy reaction, "have you seen this?" But oh well. In that cabin, he possessed 2 typewriters, one of which appeared to be a match to the one that created the manifesto and would be extensively tested. Kaczynski's DNA will be tested against the saliva found on the stamps. But there would be one challenge greater than trying to positively identify the man. The most daunting task, and one that may never be complete, is to determine how he chose his victims. How, in his omnivorous reading of magazines, newspapers, journals, and academic tests, particular names caught his attention and sparked his rage. How did he choose these people? Kaczynski is not without a twisted sense of humor. Jokes, even. Remember how I mentioned one target of his was the United Airlines president, Percy Wood? Percy Wood? And how his bomb was encased in a copy of Ice Brothers? That work is published by Arbor House, its logo being a leaf. This was the only image of it I could find, by the way. I'm not sure if they've rebranded since. Whether this is his meta-commentary about the attack on nature and how technology is destroying man and the environment, or just a joke to give himself a chuckle, will likely never have a clear answer. So that is the arrest and capture of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Now, this was part bombing linguistic FBI response was the factual account. That is the history of the Unabomber saga. Now the fun begins. We have finished what one could easily describe as a complete count, a full story. The story has a beginning, middle, and end. Rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, all there. The day could end, and you would have a nice, full retelling of the Unabomber saga. But we've only just begun. We're not going to talk about the Unabomber now. No. Like I said, we're here to talk about the world around him. The person we're going to talk about and look at is none other than Theodore Kaczynski. Bum, 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 Yes, that's right. No need to question whether or not you're finally having that seizure you know you're long overdue for. You heard me. Theodore Kaczynski had a life before he left that package in the parking lot. He is more than just an amassment of crimes. Remember well that the most inhuman acts are still performed by humans. At one point in time, he was a child, a mother's son. Now, I will note, I am aware of the Murray experiment, and by association later, MKUltra, in case you were wondering. I know about these, I've read about them. I'm familiar with what took place, and the methodology of it, from the testimony of people who participated in it. Right or wrong, it strays too close to places I simply don't want or feel like going to. It opens doors to discourse that is only a stone's throw away from conspiracy theory, and I don't entertain or indulge those. I'm not nearly deep in enough to do right by them, if you deem those worthy of respect anyway. But more egregiously, the reason I will acknowledge the Murray experiment and then promptly move on is that it feels like putting a pin in the matter and saying the question has its answer. This is what made the Unabomber. Ignoring the points brought up and the complicated, complex state of the world that led to that point. No. We will go on. So where to start? Where to start? As a small child? Perhaps we should jump right into his Harvard years. Higher education is always formative for the development of one's adult ideologies and outlooks on life. Thank you very much, Aguma. Especially when you consider he began at 16 years old. But we'll get to those in a moment. No, you certified dummy, you've missed the factual account, but we're starting the extrapolation of it. So I think this is a good time as any. I think to best understand his youth, we first need to look at his final adult character. Understand who he was, besides just a bomber. This will be the Theodore Kaczynski who was assigned the moniker of the Unabomber. We need to see how he ended up to gain an understanding of where his childhood path ended. The town of Lincoln would describe him as the hermit on the hill, a quiet neighbor who kept to himself, an ideal neighbor in some ways. Funnily enough, there were some who hated him intensely, always vocalizing their disdain and actively harassing him. The entire group had him figured out long before the FBI did. Who were these insightful ones that could smell trouble coming from far away? Dogs. Dogs. Good boys! Good boys! All the dogs hated him, recalled Rick Christian, 48, a longtime local. They'd chase him, bark at him, growl at him when he walked or rode his bike. I had to call them off him before. The dogs figured it out long before we did. The part about smelling trouble coming wasn't an exaggeration either. He would come into town after being gone for weeks, dressed in black or fatigues reeking of wood smoke. Sometimes hitching a ride from the mailman if the weather was poor. Oh, the irony. If you wrote this irony and tried to get this published, your editor would think you're being way too on the nose with it. Like, come on. From here, he would take care of his business like using the phone, reading books, newspapers, and journals at the library, or stocking up on supplies at the grocery store. Tuna and spam and flour packed into his bag before he departed once again for a few weeks. Odd, but nothing too out of the ordinary for the area, considering the people who come to get away from the world go there to Lincoln. A testament to how easy it might be for someone to make what he made. Ted wasn't much of a handyman, not particularly skilled or gifted in that regard. To his credit, his one-speed bike was pieced together out of spare parts. Leland Mason was Ted's closest neighbor and had this to say about him. Ted was a hard worker, but he was not a smart worker. Short on common sense, he was not mechanically inclined. He had one old pickup truck one summer and drove it until it quit on him. It was just a minor thing that was wrong with the truck, but he didn't know how to fix it. He just let it sit up there until someone bought it from him. Only cost the new owner $25 for the part. Ted had a hard time with everyday mechanical things, and so we see his Joker origin story. Not really, but it's funny to imagine that if that exacerbated his unreasonable hatred for technology. Maybe fun to think about. So, how did this affect the actual bombs? Most did exactly what they set out to do, so how is the build quality of them? Don Davis, a top postal inspector in San Francisco, said, "He polished and sometimes varnished his wood pieces. But it was clear, from the skewed corners and amateurish joints, that he was not a trained woodworker. He's not a craftsman. His cuts aren't straight, they don't make right angles. He spends a lot of time. He does a lot of polishing and sanding to make it feel nice, but they don't really look craftsman-like." With this in mind, let's look at the man he grew up to be. Let's journey into his past. Hello, Otis. Let's talk about little Teddy Kaz. Once again, we return to the windy city of Chicago to examine the formative years of Kaczynski. He was born as the son of a Polish sausage maker, and right from the start, he showed promise as a young child. His parents were insistent on his academic success to the point his aunt was worried they're going to turn him into a snob. Wanda, his mother, not this Wanda in case you were wondering, but Wanda, his mother, would take him to art museums with the goal of stimulating his intellect. It's a teddy bear. You want to beat him up? Yeah. Kaczynski himself would say that his home life was unhappy, and social isolation was the result of his parents pushing him too hard academically. Two sides to every story, though. David and Wanda Kaczynski say their home was average and happy, and Ted showed signs of extreme alienation since childhood. My source, Alson Chase, says the image of Kaczynski as a recluse is greatly exaggerated. Classmates, teachers, neighbors, and any reporters that look into this would say he was not the extreme loner we see him as. So we have conflicting accounts now. Normally, it would be us to pick a side and choose who to believe. The incarcerated terrorist, or the guy who turned him in. But that lacks nuance. There's a backstory to everything. And don't underestimate what your doctor is capable of uncovering. Let's take a look at the setting and context for his early social and school life. If you understand one thing about me, is I hate the pitfall of thinking the past is summed up in neat little bows, and explanations are straight arrows to results. We are not so far removed from our forefathers. Speaking of, you like father issues? Let's get some daddy issues. His father, the Polish sausage maker I mentioned before, is Theodore R. Turk Kaczynski. Wrong Turk. Right Turk. Referenced as Turk hereafter, some of the stress of conformity and fitting in came from his community. Turk was a self-educated freethinker, but they lived in a conventionally Catholic working-class neighborhood. The Kaczynskis were atheist and non-conforming, but in order to be perceived as conforming, they were instructed to tell people they were Unitarians, all in an effort to look good to the neighbors. The brightness and promise Theodore Kaczynski showed made itself quantifiable and very evident when in the 5th grade he scored 167 on an IQ test. He skipped the 6th grade to end up in a new classroom as the smallest kid of the room, leaving his friends behind. From then on, according to Kaczynski and also others who knew his family, his parents valued his intellect as a trophy that gave the Kaczynskis special status. They began to push him to study, lecturing him if his report card showed any grade below an A. Meanwhile, Turk seemed, to Kaczynski at least, to become increasingly cold, critical, and distant. That hit home for anybody? You know, with the grades and everything, nothing below an A? Are you beginning to empathize with the Unabomber? Are you empathizing with the Unabomber yet? Okay, so, hold. School life, a little rocky, a little strained. It'll get better, right? Stabilize and even out, right? Ah. Okay then. We're not going to... No, that doesn't exactly really fly. My apologies. Now, let's look. Let's hop over to high school. The year is 1952. Little Teddy is 10 years old. They move from Chicago to the suburbs of Evergreen Park. Ah, nice place. To provide him with a better class of friends, as his parents would explain to him. Sounds good. New community comprised of Irish, Italian, Czech, and Polish folks. You know, decent mix of countries, you know? There's nothing around the 1950s that could possibly end up creating tension here, right? Oh, right. May 17th, 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka ruled that it was unconstitutional to segregate schools. Well, I mean, good thing his neighborhood was mixed, right? People from many different... Oh, right. This did not go over well with the people of Evergreen Park, and concerned about the African-American community encroaching on them. Shopping, eating at businesses, teenagers hanging around the Evergreen Plaza. The audacity, open bracket, sarcasm, close bracket. The Kaczynskis, as a family, were actually liberal when it came to race matters, for what it's worth. Now, on the subject of high school, there was no high school. Well, a building, that is. Evergreen Park had a fragmented school system where students were bused to schools in nearby communities. It wasn't until 1955, 1 year after Brown versus the Board, that the Evergreen Park High School was created, and Kaczynski would be part of the first class. Teachers would describe the school as a school for strangers, a place without cohesion or community. Few of the students knew each other. To the school's credit, they had a large budget and employed excellent instructors from all over the whole country, the kind that would normally be teaching junior college. My source says the students were exposed to ideas they had never encountered before, broadening the horizons of some of these naive youths. who had never even been downtown. They were asked to read books normally used by undergrads, and Kaczynski adapted. Okay, so the education's not bad there. Let's move onwards a little to his sophomore year at school. Administration made the recommendation Kaczynski should skip his junior year and jump to senior. Keep in mind, he has skipped one grade already. His band teacher and friend, James Oberto, remembers pleading with Kaczynski's father not to allow it, but Turk wouldn't listen. Ted's success meant too much to him, Oberto says. So now, little Teddy is 2 years younger than all his classmates and already small for his age. He became more of an outcast. Sally Johnson reports Kaczynski as admitting there was a gradual, increasing amount of hostility I had to face from the other kids. By the time I left high school, I was definitely regarded as a freak by a large segment of the student body. Even with all this, he was still involved with his school life. He was social enough. He was a member of several clubs: chess, biology, German, mathematics. He collected coins. He played the trombone. Reading was a passion of his, absorbing knowledge from many fields. He studied Bach, Vivaldi, Gabrieli, music theory, and he wrote compositions for his family to perform with his father and brother. He wrote music. He may have not been popular with the rest of the student body, but he was a good student, and by extension, a favorite of his teachers. Let's see some of the comments his teachers describe him as. They would say he is entirely normal, honest, ethical, sociable, the ringleader of many friends, a teaching assistant to those struggling with math, marks for neatness, respect for others, courtesy, respect for law and order, self-discipline. His greatest praise would come from his high school counselor, Lois Skillen, who wrote this to Harvard. Of all the youngsters I have worked with at the college level, I believe Ted is one of the greatest contributions to make to society. He is reflective, sensitive, deeply conscious of his responsibilities to society. His only drawback is a tendency to be rather quiet in his original meetings with people. But most adults on our staff and many people in the community who are mature find him easy to talk to and very challenging intellectually. He has a number of friends among high school students and seems to influence them to think more seriously. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice a recurring pattern as I swing the pendulum between different perceptions of Kaczynski as we travel through his childhood. That's my deliberate narrative choice. We won't dawdle on any one perspective long to avoid storytelling flaws. Which is why I want to offer this tidbit in case you had the notion Kaczynski being a little bit too relatable, just like you. This anecdote comes from Dale Eichelman, a childhood friend of Ted's. I remember Ted had the know-how of putting together things like batteries, wire leads, potassium nitrate, and whatever in creating explosions, recalls his boyhood friend Dale Eichelman, now a Dartmouth professor. The boys detonated explosives in fields or in a metal garbage can, using ingredients they could scrounge around the house or buy at the hardware store? To what degree did his adult life shape the man we know today? Was he always born with that nature? Your answer will be solely your own. Now, as you ponder that, let's look at the next major phase of his life. Harvard. Harvard. Higher education. Spring of 1958, and not even 16, he was accepted. Despite warnings that Ted was too young and immature for such a setting, his father insisted. Our friend would recall Kaczynski's journey into Harvard as an ego trip for his father, Turk. We are at an extremely delicate and formative time and place in little Teddy's life right now. He is away from home at a very impressionable age where he is ready to absorb all he encounters. At the age of 16, he moves out and boards at the Elliott House with 5 other students. With newfound freedom and lacking the supporting structure of family and public school, we see another side of him come out through the testimony of his roommates. As a contrast to the previous accounts, now he seems much more antisocial. A roommate recalls having no interaction or talking with him. Another one would say he could avoid relationships by moving around in groups of people and slam the door behind him. The Elliott House was where Harvard's lone wolves tended to end up. His hygiene was a little questionable, as one housemate would say that his room was like a swamp, and the master of the house needed to see what was up. Apparently, it was 1 or 2 feet deep in trash, with a smell akin to unused cartons of milk. Okay. Slow the roll here. Slow down. This is just an example of, like, neckbeard nest, so not really his, but you get the idea. 1 to 2 feet of trash. But please understand. Okay. He's having some trouble adjusting socially. That's fair. Come on, he's 16. A reluctance to talk to people, or not being inclined to clean your room when you first move out and start living on your own, is not indicative of extremist roots. Otherwise, this stream was just a honeypot for the FBI to get the viewer list. Now, we need to talk about what exactly the atmosphere and culture was like in Harvard and its curriculum. Little Teddy is absorbing this all like a sponge, and he gains exposure to the large of society. We would direct our attention to the new curricular reform that was being implemented nationwide in the 1950s. I spy. And specifically for all Harvard freshmen. You ready for this? You're not ready for this. You ready for this? General education. Otherwise referred to as Gen Ed. You may be thinking, like, what? Math and science? And English? How is that relevant? The answer is a little complicated. President Harry Truman's Commission on Higher Education would express Gen Ed as a goal to establish, quote, a code of behavior based on ethical principles consistent with democratic ideals. Remember, we did just come out of World War II. So, oh, Doctor, that's nice and all, but you still haven't explained what's so scary about the general education curriculum. Well, thank you. Strawman, for your input. Very valuable. Get out of here, Strawman. Hello, Accurus. Welcome in, everybody. You just missed the Strawman. We are talking about the Unabomber today. I am moving on with the lesson, but everybody please buckle up. We're talking about Gen Ed. Here it is. Gen Ed was designed to be, of course, interdisciplinary, with focuses on science, literature, philosophy, history, Western institutions. You know, what you'd expect. Benign at a glance, but meant to be divided into two categories. On one side, we have generalizations, with history and values being emphasized. The humanities, you could say. Yeah? The other side of the coin is value-free and objective, emphasizing the methodologies scholars used in practice in various fields. Math and sciences. What we have here is an attempt to balance humanism and positivism, a war between believing in the goodness and value of people versus cold logic, the theory that morality should not limit oneself if you are acting rationally. The president of Harvard, James B. Conant, wrote this to the committee that would design Gen Ed. Society. He said, "Unless the educational process includes at each level of maturity some continuing contact with those fields in which value judgments are of prime importance, it must fall far short of the ideal. The student in high school, in college, and in graduate school must be concerned, in part at least, with the words right and wrong in both the ethical and mathematical sense." So, the goal here is a little lofty, but it comes from a good place. Teach morality and objectivity through education of specific disciplines. That's a nice thing. Good. It's a nice sentiment. The thing is, teachers are human, unfortunately, and as such, very subject to passing their classrooms through their personal filters. The faculty of 1950s Harvard was divided into two camps. The ones who, in wake of World War II and the atomic bombings, saw science and technology as a threat to Western values and possibly human survival as a species. The other side were those who viewed science and objectivity as a pathway to progress to free the world from superstition. Guess which group won out in the majority on campus? The science lovers, actually. Positivism won out in Harvard culture among the student body and faculty. Professors were resistant to the program's instructions and never fully implemented the teaching within, some going so far as to subvert it and emphasize the opposite. Traditional values were undermined by the faculty. Freshmen would often recite the mantra of, "Thou shalt not utter a value judgment." Well, this isn't inherently bad. Positivism is arguably at its core optimistic. It believes the world can definitely improve and good things are yet to come. It places its faith in the perfectibility of science to guide people. Reason is liberating. The advance of science will reveal truths of nature and the world around us, doing away with superstition. The, dark side of positivism is that it teaches the whole of non-scientific knowledge and master human history has little value. Religions and philosophies were plain nonsense. simply cultural mores, and that life has no purpose, and morality no justification. My article says that this clashing and mixing of ideals led to a culture of despair at Harvard. The humanists say that science threatens civilization. After seeing the atomic bombs? Yeah. Fair point. 15 love. But then you have the scientists that say science cannot stop. It cannot be halted, and it will go on. Together, this is the culture of despair. Science threatens the world, and we cannot stop it. There is no hope for us. The last I'll say on Harvard is regards to the literature Kaczynski was exposed to. I can't speak for others in this regard, but I know I readily taken the lessons literature offers, whether intended or unintended. The intellectual climate of Harvard and the Gen Ed program has many striking parallels to philosophies Kaczynski and later the Unabomber possessed. The despair we talked about is present here. Its anti-technology message and its despairing depiction of the sinister forces that lie beneath the surface of civilization, its emphasis on the alienation of the individual and on the threats that science pose to human values, all of these were in the readings. These kinds of ideas did not affect Kaczynski alone. They reached an entire generation and beyond. So, what were these books? Let's take a look. I have not personally read each one of them, so the description will come from the citation, not myself. Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead and Patterns of Culture by Ruth Benedict were assigned to establish that ethical standards were simply expression of Western cultural mores. That's what they derived out of looking at different cultures around the world. Ethics were expressions of Western standards. Going forward, another one they read was The Future of an Illusion by Sigmund Freud. This work is an argument against religious faith and the idea that life has meaning. We are simply slaves to our instinctual wishes. Sorry about that mix-up. I haven't memorized. I haven't memorized all of my notes. Norbert Wiener's writings taught that the new Industrial Revolution means a decade or more of despair unless human nature itself changes. Now, let's talk about Germans. You know, Germans famous for their sense of humor, right? In his German studies, Kaczynski ran into pessimistic writers like Oswald Spengler. Here's Spengler, everybody. Wait a second. I'm sorry. That's just a black and white picture of Bruce Willis from my collection of black and white pictures of Bruce Willis. My bad. Here. Oswald. Wait a second. Wait, sorry. That's a black and white picture of Dean Norris, who plays Hank from Breaking Bad, from my collection of black and white pictures of Dean Norris, who plays Hank from Breaking Bad. Spengler. Here. Spengler. Spengler. He went as far as saying technology will result in the collapse of civilization and humanity's triumphs being forgotten and left to rot in ruins. There was also Friedrich Nietzsche, who said very comforting, uplifting things like, God is dead. Morality is the herd instinct of the individual. The thought of suicide is a great comfort. Ah. Warm and fuzzy sentiments here for little Teddy to take in. Lewis Mumford, Stan's son, expressed the idea that Western man has given up his purpose to the machine, and we have become desocialized, depersonalized, and humanity has forsaken its dignity. We can no longer live in this world given up to devitalized machines. Then you have Thorstein Veblen, who predicted, so long as the machine culture, I don't have no idea what country, so long as the machine culture process continues to hold its dominant place as a disciplinary factor in modern culture, so long must the spiritual and intellectual life of this cultural era maintain the character which the machine process gives it. That is to say, we are beholden to the machine. We must take what it gives us. People are molded by technology, not the other way around. What was once a tool now forces us to adapt to it or be left behind. Sound familiar? Are you seeing a theme yet? Okay. They sound a little dour, a little serious. Oh, come on, Doctor. Lighten the mood, will you? Okay, I get the message, Strawman, thank you. That's not to say everything in the curriculum was like this. Not everything is critical all the time. Satire is a nice break from all the doom and gloom. And, right? Yeah. Joseph Conrad was one of Kaczynski's favorite authors and also the writer behind The Secret Agent, who had some nice irony in his works. He wrote about bomb-wielding anarchists who declare war on science. I've always dreamed of a band of men absolute in the resolve to discard all scruples in the choice of means. Strong enough to give themselves frankly the name of destroyers, and free from the taint of that resigned pessimism which rots the world. No pity for anything on earth, including themselves, and death enlisted for good and all in the service of humanity. Surely from what we've read, Kaczynski is emotionally and socially competent enough not to take this seriously, right? Oh no. Oh. Yeah. It's irony. This is a work of satire, by the way. The last point I'm going to bring up here is a hot take for some, lukewarm take for others. Brum, brum, air horns. Brum, brum. Lukewarm take for those versed in the sphere of this literature and way of thought. Some critics will say that people believe Kaczynski's insane because they need to. Otherwise, they have to acknowledge the points he brings up and take a hard look at the world and if there is any substance to the truths proclaimed in the manifesto. But the dirty little secret here is that the concepts presented in industrial society and its future are more familiar than foreign. One can say the manifesto is neither genius nor the work of a maniac, simply because it is largely unoriginal, and the viewpoints are ordinary, shared by many Americans. What sets this apart is the call for violence, and obviously the action bundled with it. Look at all the literature and schools of thought I brought up in this section. His manifesto is, one could say, cliché. Kaczynski is not Karl Marx looking for his Lenin. He is the Lenin. he's the manifestation of sentiments from those that came before, brought to a boil and spilled over. You want further evidence to support this claim? Take a look at post-Harvard Kaczynski. In 1954, French philosopher Jacques Ellul wrote a book called The Technological Society. Let's take a gander at some of the points brought up. Technology is no longer a tool, but instead pursued as an end in itself. Society serves technology, not the other way around, and individuals only have value as long as they serve this end. Education and the structures of institutions are shaped solely for the sake of advancing technology. Ring a bell? Kaczynski recalled in 1998 about the time he found Ellul. I had already developed at least 50% of the ideas of that book on my own. And when I read the book for the first time, I was delighted because I thought, here is someone who is saying what I have already been thinking. Kaczynski is not genius nor maniac simply because he's not original. That's Harvard. So where do we go from here? We've talked about the man, right? We talked about his education, his upbringing. Thank you very much, Masonic. The next section is one that may evoke a personal or visceral reaction in those that see the title. This has to be talked about to do right to the pursuit of knowledge, and my creed to looking where others avert their gaze. We have to talk about this. In defense of the Unabomber, I must re-emphasize the disclaimer here that I do not condone any act of violence or extremist actions. To harm or kill your fellow man in such a way crosses the boundaries of what I believe people have the right to do. Thank you for the gaze. But a defense can take many forms. There is the factual account of his legal defense to examine. There is a philosophical defense of ideals, and there is discussion of what, if any, defenses his possible mental condition affords him. What? What's with the faces? What did you think I was defending? I'm beginning to think people have this very twisted impression of me. Please remember, I am stable and sane to a fault. With that in mind, let's talk about defending the Unabomber. If you recall, back when I was giving the account of his arrest and capture, we ended precisely there, at his arrest and capture. Because that's not where our story ends. Mainly because this is a story where the ending has yet to be penned. That said, I'd be shocked if there was any final destination besides the one that looks the most likely at this point in time. So the sane state you put... Lilies are treatable with ogays. Perfectly fine. I digress again. We need to continue our journey as ghosts trailing the footsteps of this tale. We're not done with the story. Arrest and custody is not the finale, even with the burgeoning mountain of evidence found in that woodland cabin. Any Google search, and even the most remedial summary of the Unabomber account, will tell you this little detail. Kaczynski pled guilty to the charges. He is now serving life at a supermax prison in Colorado, and very recently, as of last year, a medical facility in North Carolina. But, there we go. An end to the story, all wrapped up in a little bow. The only thing really left is his inevitable death as a prisoner any day now. But to keep the metaphor running, The ribbon of a bow is made up of numerous individual strands, a number of fine details that, when consolidated, form the nitty-gritty of reality that the passing eye won't catch. Okay, that's enough of the floaty language. Next bit, an examination and account of his defense team and the events leading up to that guilty plea. In the first place, let's establish what the goals for each side here were. On May 15th, Attorney General Janet Reno, there she is, set their sights on the death penalty. Oh yes, they were originally gunning to execute him. This decision was disheartening for the defense, but also notably David Kaczynski, the very brother that turned in this man, who planned 16 bombings over 17 years. I must admit that the government's decision to seek the death penalty for Ted greatly saddens me, David wrote in a statement for US News. There is no way around the fear and sorrow that comes with knowing you may have a hand in causing the death of someone you love. The point of contention this whole business revolves around here is simple. It is not a question of whether this is the right man, if this is truly the Unabomber. The tricky part to navigate is the status of Kaczynski's mental health. Is this man unwell, of an unsound mind? That's the linchpin of all this. Were the acts he performed the product of illness or evil? Let's walk along the sidelines again. Not prosecution or defense, but family. David and their mother were very much against the death penalty. They would be witnesses to testify to Theodore's deteriorating mental health. And think about it from their perspective. Sacramento criminal lawyer Donald Heller said this: "The argument is that his family brought him to the attention of authorities, and his family should not be punished by having him executed. What they did saved lives. This guy had a bomb ready to go. Locking him up for life protects society and rewards the family for bringing to authorities a person who was a clear and present danger. It sets a dangerous precedent for those brave enough to come forward with information. Would you come forward to turn in a family member if you knew there was a historic record of the death penalty being pursued?" It could deter some folks, to be sure. Though, this help didn't seem to be appreciated very much. The irony is that the last thing Kaczynski has wanted in the past is help from his family. In a 1991 letter that has been cited by prosecutors, he wrote, "I have got to know that every last tie joining me to the stinking family has been cut forever." So, it seems he doesn't think too much of Dear Family's assistance here. Wait. You guys smell something? It smells like prime time. What's this? Good evening, sports fans. Bob, can you believe this lineup? Ted Unabomber Kaczynski has spent 17 seasons playing a strong, untouchable offense, but after that last fumble with the manifesto, now in the 11th hour he's been switched to defense. I don't think he's in his element here, and it's not looking good for him. He's got his work cut out for him, and that's sure. Now, we know the prosecution's game plan. Look. Bam! 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 Use the overwhelming amounts of evidence to prove Kaczynski is guilty and seek the death penalty for the Unabomber through demonstrating a desire to kill. And what a draft pick of an all-star offensive line they got. Reno is a veteran on the field, and Cleary's no slouch either. I'll tell you that. They're here to score points and score big to take home victory on behalf of the nation. Now, take a look what the defense has going for them. The goal of the defense team is to talk them down from executing Kaczynski and aim for a mental illness ruling to avoid Kaczynski from getting unlifed. There's no hope for a not guilty verdict to clear his name here. To stay in the game, they've got to stop the offense from scoring. And on the sidelines, you have the family willing to go to bat to Ted, happy to explain to the court how he's been having some tough times. It's gonna be one heck of a game, Bob. There is only, one teeny issue here. One teensy, tiny, little, itty, bitty issue. You know, really just a small blip, you know? You see, the problem here is Kaczynski is refusing the insanity defense. He is a man who would rather be executed by the state than labeled as a sickie, as he called it. And boy, howdy did he try. The man refused to be seen by state psychiatric experts. Defense experts, yes, but not the state. This refusal to play ball led to the judge ruling he must comply, and the prosecution moved to have sanctions prohibiting mental illness evidence. If you're the defense, you're sweating bullets. Time to make a play. The defense would argue that the reason Kaczynski was not complying was that he couldn't. Supposedly, he possessed a phobia of psychiatrists born out of fear of being considered mentally ill. Dr. Vernon Foster had this to declare to the court. In Mr. Kaczynski's perception, psychiatrists seek to eliminate free will and personal autonomy by creating a population that is wholly compliant with the needs of an omnipotent system. A significant feature of Mr. Kaczynski's illness is his pathological fear and compulsive aversion to evaluation by psychiatrists. Okay, pretty sound. In addition to running counter to his beliefs and worldviews, it's complicated to diagnose a man with mental illness if he fears being diagnosed with mental illness in the first place. Yeah, maybe a point. But there's a twist. You don't get to become probably the most hated man in the United States without some blowback. Robert J. Cleary led the prosecution team. The man was a top federal prosecutor from New Jersey and former chief of the renowned Major Crimes Unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York City. They sent their best and it showed. The prosecution team found evidence to show that Kaczynski did, in fact, have a history of consulting with psychiatrists about women and insomnia issues. So now they argue that supposed phobia was a fabrication, as here is proof he is not afraid of correspondence with mental health professionals. They turned it back so far as to claim the phobia was an attempt to manipulate the court. Now the judge was considering those sanctions barring mental illness evidence. Defense needs to change lanes and find a new game plan, and quick. That's when my source personally stepped in. Xavier F. Amador, PhD, has dedicated a significant time into the study of schizophrenia. Specifically in this case, anosognosia in schizophrenia. I can tell we're gonna need to go for this bit. Agnosia is an inability to recognize things. Anosognosia, in a nutshell, is when someone is unaware of their mental health condition. This can manifest in different ways. One can simply lack awareness of their condition. They can also persist in belief when confronted with evidence, and even go as far as to explain away the evidence. There exists a compulsion to prove their self-concept. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy! Why won't somebody believe me? I'm not crazy! When Amador learned of the legal arguments taking place, he contacted the defense to tell them there was research that may be relevant to them. When the defense learned of this research, they took the argument in a new direction. No longer was it phobia that caused Kaczynski to disobey the court. No. But instead, it was mental defect. Judge seemed happy with this. Defense seemed happy with this. You know who wasn't happy with this? Teddy Boy! Remember that whole thing about preferring being executed by the state over being declared insane? Yeah, that's still a thing. That didn't stop being a thing. When he learned about the new angle his lawyers were planning, I don't think you could say he was very happy. He moved to have him fired and wanted to represent himself. The judge gave the smackdown on that idea, ooh yeah, brother, and said he couldn't fire them nor defend himself. Keep the show rolling. One little spat unhappily resolved later, and we can move onward to the trial. The next major development is when the court appointed Dr. Sally Johnson, an independent expert, to examine Kaczynski. This time around, he is game to participate. He wants to prove he is competent enough to stand trial, defend himself, and prove he is not mentally ill. What Dr. Johnson found was very, very interesting. Kaczynski was found to have paranoid schizophrenia. And he was competent to stand trial. Imagine the reactions on both sides. Defense is probably nervous about the prospect of heading further into trial with that mountain of evidence. You know, the diary and the live bombs and stuff. Prosecution now has to contend with sending a mentally unsound man to be executed. Like some of the greatest resolutions in history, a compromise was made. Life in prison or a plea bargain. January 22nd, 1998, Theodore Kaczynski agreed to the plea bargain. On paper, this was done to avoid a capital trial, but it could be more accurate to say he wanted desperately to avoid an insanity defense. The press would have their own spin on things, as they often do. Now, that was a lot to take in, right? That was a pretty dense, series of events. Good thing, your doctor has just the thing for what ails you. Someone get the lights. Thank you. Wait, that's wrong game. I don't know the tune. Here we are. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you appreciated that. I do that for you. Ah. Now, this is a good section. This is my favorite section. we're not finished here. We're only on part 8 now. Part 8. We still have more that we haven't talked about that I touched on. How long did that take? The big part of the curve is like trying to figure out the system itself. Once you get that down, it's just like baby's first scripting lesson. So now, we talked about his legal defense, and we touch on what defense his possible mental condition affords him. But you'll remember there's one more aspect I mentioned here. A defense of ideals and ethics. We are going to specifically examine these. The ideas in industrial society and its future are very well known. But how often have you seen it subject to serious philosophical criticism? Many people say that, yes, Kaczynski was nuts and bombing is bad, but he did have some interesting ideas. Maybe he has a point in there somewhere. I will relay the presentation of the Unabomber's ideas found in the manifesto from a journal called Bioethics, in which Ole Martin Moen, a Norwegian research fellow in philosophy at the University of Oslo, explains Kaczynski's ideals and presents arguments rejecting their philosophical premises. I'll be shocked if I'm still alive by the end of this, by the way. I am aware this skirts dangerously close to the restrictions in the guidelines I cited earlier, but I am not looking at the manifesto directly, just another commentary on the work. If this is to be my downfall, I accept the consequences of my actions. Hello, Super Spartan Galaxies, or Super Spartaxi. Now here it is. The arguments presented in the Unabomber Manifesto, Industrial Society and its Future. The first point we are going to bring up is a very common and central idea. Technology has taken away our ability to control our lives. Primitive man, threatened by fierce animal or by hunger, can fight in self-defense or travel in search of food. The modern individual, on the other hand, is threatened by many things against which he is helpless. Nuclear accidents, carcinogens in food, environmental pollution, wars, increasing taxes, for some people, invasion of his privacy, large organizations, nationwide social or economic phenomena that may disrupt his way of life. For I would say nearly all of us, we never had a choice. The social contract was signed without our consent. We were born into this world that molded us as infants into users and adopters of technology, and we adapted to the environment we grew up in. One that is plagued by issues that are entirely fabricated. There is no self-determinism in this world, because we are helpless at the hands of what technology in the society of Earth decides. It's a pleasure to meet you too, Sonic. Go ahead and try to defy things like pollution or nuclear war. See how that ends up for you. An entirely pointless endeavor, where struggling is futile, and you are resigned to accept the fruits of the industrial society. Furthermore, that leads into our second point. Establishing that we cannot separate technology from our lives, technology has also made our lives monotonous and dull. In the past, humanity thrived by using our physical and mental efforts to sustain ourselves. We lack this need to exert effort anymore, so in this viewpoint, we feel we need to do something. We need to feel in control of our lives. So we supplement this missing need through a thing called surrogate activities. These are activities that aim not at satisfying real needs, but at giving us fulfillment. An example of this is the pursuit of wealth beyond the minimum amount we need to live. We don't require more than the minimum amount of wealth to live by definition. We don't need it. But we still pursue it. We tell ourselves we need to in order to create a hollow goal to achieve. And surrogate activities are not limited to recreation. Science itself falls under this umbrella as well. The possible rare exceptions, their, scientists, motive is neither curiosity nor a desire to benefit humanity, but the need to go through the power process. To have a goal, a scientific problem to solve. To make an effort, research. And to attain the goal, solution of the problem. Science is a surrogate activity because scientists work mainly for the fulfillment they get out of the work itself. The best way to phrase this, unironically, they do what they must because they can. I never thought I would actually use that phrase unironically to get a point across, but that's exactly it. Scientists do what they must because they can. In the view of Kaczynski, only real struggle will result in real fulfillment, and he'll rouse you. The actions that aim for fulfillment themselves over the satisfaction of real needs will never be truly fulfilling. The third point here is that technology poses a threat precisely because it is nearly unstoppable. There's no denying that invention and innovation solve problems facing our present lives. As such, it makes sense to embrace them. But we neglect the long-term consequences of technology. Take a look at history. Lead paint, very useful. It turned out to be hazardous for our health. Whoopsie! Asbestos is a wonderful material. You know, except for all those little downsides we discovered later. The boom of industry a century ago is now today's pollution. If we look at the present, we see something as innocuous as cars threaten people in society. They are noisy and polluting, yes, but beyond that, they have resulted in cities developing in ways that are hostile to pedestrians. Aye. Cities are designed around cars now, which in turn prompts more people to buy and use cars. Maybe some people here will sympathize when I ask, have you ever felt left out of society by not having a driver's license? Huh? In his own words, he says, few people will resist the introduction of a genetic technique that eliminates hereditary disease. It does no apparent harm and prevents such suffering. Yet a large number of genetic improvements taken together will make the human being into an engineered product rather than a free creation of chance. You talk to anybody with a genetic disease, they give anything to cure it, but is there an incline or decline to that slippery slope? Do we take now a cocktail of genetic treatments to, like, fix people? Is there... It's a tough question that we're not going to get into now, but that's what his thoughts on it. And speaking of engineered product, that's our next point here. We've established he thinks technology's out of control. Wee-oo. But where will this all end up? Where are we going? The runaway trolley has to crash sometime, doesn't it? He theorizes that we are heading to a world of intelligent machines with two distinct results. Either humans will be eradicated, or the population will end up like domesticated animals, akin to the society described in Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I'll say it like that. So he thinks there are two results: eradication or Brave New World. They will see to it that everybody's physical needs are satisfied, that all children are raised under psychologically hygienic conditions. that everyone has a wholesome hobby to keep him busy, and that anyone who may become dissatisfied undergoes treatment to cure his problem. Of course, life will be so purposeless that people will have to biologically or psychologically engineered either to remove their need for the power process or to make them sublimate their drive for power into some harmless hobby. Oh, that's ridiculous. Ridiculous. These engineered human beings may be happy in such a society, but they will most certainly not be free. They will have been reduced to the status of domestic animals. I am very proud of my sheep impression. Human society is doomed, unless there is some intervention to bring people back to a pre-industrial state. Technical books should be burned, factories destroyed, and we return to nature. With the only technology being things like water wheels or blacksmithing, things that communities can use without outside assistance. He knows the fight will bring suffering, but even death and suffering are preferable to the hollow life the alternative provides. Remember that bit earlier about how positivism disregards morality if you're acting rationally? Here it is. That war between people against science and positivism, he's technically in both camps. He hates science, but he also believes in the cold nature of logic. He's working on both sides of that. Well, it's a little extreme, right? You may think this is extreme. Death and suffering are preferable to a technical life. Hollow life. Oh, I get it. But that's exactly the point he wants to make. Kaczynski doesn't want reform and moderation. The goal is revolution, where that will kill technical civilization and leave it buried. It's compared to an arms race where if you are moderate, you lose. Those that reject fossil fuels for renewable sources only leave more fuel for the competitors to use themselves. He concludes that the environmental movement will never succeed in counteracting the harmful effects of technology. The death of technological civilization is argued to be a good goal because it is simple. It has a clear criteria for success. Once it succeeds, the results will be irreversible. Compare this to 20th century socialist revolutions, where the goal was complicated with a vague success criterion. Furthermore, since socialist revolutions had only attempted to alter the structure of society, the effects could be undone at any time. The anti-tech revolution destroys advanced technology and erases that knowledge from the whole of humanity. Like we said, burning books. And how can this revolution be achieved? Who will need to do this and what are they to be like? He calls upon revolutionaries, a small and committed group that seek to undermine the people's faith in technology and look for opportunities in time, failure, and crisis. He says, desperation and anger will soon degenerate into despair and apathy. Unless the revolutionaries are able to step in at that point and inspire them with a sense of purpose, organize them, channel their fear, desperation, and anger into practical action. We must re-emphasize practical action, not just political. Remember that Kaczynski was fully prepared to face the legal system and the threat of the death penalty to avoid being called insane and discrediting his work. Say what you will, he truly believes what he writes. He's ready to die, just the same way he calls upon the revolutionaries. Sorry, one moment. I need this for a sec. Just... The same way he calls upon the revolutionaries to find inspiration, Kaczynski suggests we need only think of the early Christian martyrs, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the Islamic suicide bombers, or of the assassins of the Russian Revolution. Yeah. And when the world is in chaos and disarray, the revolutionaries will take charge like in Cuba and Russia. They are expected to do anything it takes, proceed no matter what, and fear nothing. Not even nuclear war. Unless a dedicated minority does this and allows humanity to return to small communities in their natural setting, humanity is doomed to be wiped out or end up as Brave New World. So, not my viewpoints, his. Those are some of the arguments presented in the works of Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Maybe he has a point on some things. Maybe he's a crackpot. But you have a better understanding now of what he stands for and what industrial society and its future represents. So, okay, 1 minute. It's easy to dismiss a lot of this because the bad taints a lot of the validity he may have. There may be a point to some of this. But in order to say that definitively, we have to give genuine attention and criticize this with a level head. Let's break down the problems with his arguments surgically. In the first place, Kaczynski acknowledges the benefits of technology, but really only considers the negatives. On the whole, life seems much better, doesn't it? Face wrapper. My source says that before the Industrial Revolution, all countries had a living standard comparable to today's standard in Africa south of the Sahara. Life expectancy at birth has doubled since the late 18th century. And we have improvements like sewer systems, vaccines, water chlorination, antibiotics, and many others made possible by technology. I like having toilets and plumbing. Not to mention enrichment and things to improve the individual quality of life. The printing press, music recording, glasses, painkillers, light bulbs, list goes on. Why are these neglected in his assessment? Well, for the same reason we know these to be good. Yes, these are good things. We know these to be good. The benefits are obvious and widely known. He thinks his job is to list the harms, which are considered much less. Or the other reason may be that in his view of ethics, the benefits of these things have little or no value. He evaluates the problems caused by technology very differently than the problems caused by a lack of technology. Remember how we said that modern man is powerless against the results of technology in technological society like pollution or taxes? He concedes that primitive man is also powerless against their own set of issues like disease. Yeah, there's no stopping disease either. He doesn't ascribe much concern for this, as he says that he can accept the risk of disease stoically. And that's our counter-argument to his first point. If we can accept the problems of the pre-industrial world stoically, why can't we also accept the problems of the post-industrial world stoically? Where is the merit in one problem being a bigger issue than the other? Well, he explains, problems caused by nature are no one's fault. The problems caused by technology are imposed onto us. Well, yes, nature is no one's fault, and the others are constructed as a result of human action. But that's not the focus here. Kaczynski seems less interested in assigning blame than he does comparing the resulting quality of human life in industrial versus pre-industrial societies. Ethically, the problems caused by nature are not nearly as bad as the problems caused by technology, according to his perspective. There is an asymmetry here. From my source, it appears that in Kaczynski's view, quote, two equally hopeless situations can differ dramatically in how bad they are, depending whether the situation is caused by technology or caused by things in nature that count as non-technological. It tracks. Our lives depend on power plants not failing, and that's bad. But the dependence on rain to come and water our crops is fine. Oppression by bureaucracy is not good, but the possible oppression by tribes is alright. He worries about the tedious work we perform as part of an office job, but not the tedious work that we might do in pre-industrial society. The picture that emerges is that in Kaczynski's view, the harms that are averted by technology were not ethically relevant harms to begin. That what we gain from technology today does not count as ethically relevant benefits. Given this picture, it makes sense why Kaczynski only counts the downsides of technology. There are few or no ethically relevant upsides to count. Well, we may be born into the technological society and have no choice but to participate in it as children. What about when we gain the agency of adulthood? By then, we are free. We are free to release ourselves willingly from the modern society and go live close to nature, as he idealizes. There's nothing stopping us from legally doing what he did, getting attractive land in a cabin on Montana, and being the hermit on the hill. That's what he did. Kaczynski does not recognize the merit in this, the very same thing he did. The value of the opportunity to move into the wild is destroyed by the very fact that society gives it to them. What people need is to find or make their own opportunities. As long as the system gives them their opportunities, it still has them on a leash. To attain autonomy, they must get off the leash. There is no winning here in technological society, and it corrupts all that it touches, and only the complete absence of it will give people real freedom. But herein lies the fault with Kaczynski's arguments. He creates these evaluative standards and relies on them to hop from empirical observation to normative conclusion. But what are these standards? They seem arbitrary and are not explicit. They lack arguments to support them. In his works, the empirical orientation they boast are really hiding the fact that his conclusions are reached by appealing to ethical principles that rig the game strongly in disfavor of technology. It's reminiscent of the way Socrates would use shame to denote something as bad, without really saying why it was a shame or why the shame was bad. The other problem here is that he is incredibly vague. Not in his specific beliefs and call to action, those are very clear. But he is vague about himself. We don't really know what specific normative theory Kaczynski is coming from, so that makes it difficult to interpret his viewpoint critically. Is he a perfectionist who believes in the ultimate value of naturalness? Does he believe in the value of struggling and freedom? Perhaps he believes in the value of fulfillment, and struggling and freedom are the means towards that. We don't know. He never specifies his ethical standards or why the things he does value are threatened, but cannot be enhanced by technology. By now, my source says that we must reject this asymmetry, between the problems caused by technology and the problems caused by the absence of technology. If we reject this, the asymmetry, do we reject this whole argument? If we are to balance the standards between the benefits and harm of technology evenly, does he still have a point? Maybe he does. For instance, we don't know how technology is going to be used. Evoking the idea of the butterfly effect, society cannot be controlled because control requires prediction. He argues that society cannot accurately predict its own behavior over any considerable span of time. Ergo, society cannot be controlled. The future's a mystery! Who could have guessed the printing press would trigger the Reformation? Who knows how that thing we're developing now will end up? Oh. I made myself sad. But in other ways, the only points he has are ones that he has fabricated. His conclusions are driven by his assumptions, which have not had any support given for. The ultimate conclusion Kaczynski comes to is that there are two possibilities for us: eradication or Brave New World. That's it. Only these two, nothing more. The other assumption he makes is that he has already evaluated the worth of these two options and determined for me and for you that they must be avoided at any cost. How nice of him to think for us. We didn't even need to ask. Furthermore, if you critically think about his stance that life in pre-industrial society involves very little that is bad in an ethically relevant way, and that life in industrial society includes very little that is good in an ethically relevant way, it reveals that we have nothing to lose. We must try even though it may be unsuccessful and involve much suffering. How much should we expect to suffer? On this interpretation, Kaczynski does not have to believe that the anti-tech revolutionaries will be successful. Rather, his justification can be driven, as I believe it is, by the assumption that any bombed-out world and any amount of suffering that is necessary to get there is ethically superior to any future technological civilization. To sum up what I've been getting at here, the views in industrial society and its future are on shaky ground because he cannot specifically quantify the merits between technology and non-technology, evaluating them to different standards. And those standards themselves are based upon his own estimation as to the state of the world. I don't even think the guy even left the United States. His remedy for all this and call to action are revisionist and unsupported by argument. Basically, that's your opinion, man. The parting shot I want to note for my source is this. In addition to being an interesting case in its own right, Kaczynski's writings and actions can serve to highlight a more general point. Namely, that intelligent people can have glaring philosophical blind spots, and that philosophical errors can have grave practical consequences, including terrorism. So there it is. Be careful about the lessons and all that sort of stuff you take in, because just because somebody is intelligent, sensitive, does not mean that their ideals are well thought out. Everybody has their own thoughts on things, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but that doesn't mean that those opinions should be made manifest. Now, as we continue on, that is the end of our discussion on ethics. We're going to move into a new part now. We've talked about a very infamous figure, which strikes a chord with what we've done in the past. In the cannibalism stream, I I expressed a hesitance and careful deliberation on which person to highlight. As I said, there are figures that had gained too much attention they never needed. And yet here I am, talking about a man whose nickname and deeds are practically the face of domestic terrorism. There are certainly things to be learned about the influence and history behind it, but I don't just say things for respect points and then shrug them off for convenience. I'm still beholden to no one, but my past self is different. I cannot neglect my deeds and words when convenient because I live with my own judgments. And that's why this section will be a departure. No more are we going to talk about and give spotlight to the Unabomber, no. This will be different. We will instead talk about the survivors, hear their stories. This will be our final chapter before ending remarks in the conclusion. As I said in the section about the Vietnamese boat refugees in the cannibalism stream, this part will have less of the funny images. Please understand. So now, specifically, we have a very detailed account from one David Gellinter. Close to what he talked about, how to make the same analysis without being wrong. I'd have to think about that one a little bit. We have David Gellinter right here over on the left. Writer... Hello! Welcome in, Koki. No array message. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. You have come towards the tail end of our stream and lesson about the Unabomber. I'm sorry, the most fun parts are past us now. We are going to talk about the survivors of the Unabomber and hear accounts from them. And so this is more of the somber talk. Hello, welcome in, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Billy Smiles, and thank you, Gomi Moon. Thank you, Obi Diablo, and thank you once again, Koki. I'm glad that you decided to stop by. I'm glad to see you here. Now, once more, let's talk about David Gellinter. This is his account. Writer, painter, musician, whose life was violently upheaved when he opened a package on June 24th, 1993. 6 full pages of his account from Time magazine from the moment he opened the package to picking the pieces back up and putting his life together again. So, let's look. At a few details he decided to share with the world. In the first place, ever wonder what a mail bomb looks like? And what happens when you open it? He'll tell you. Hello. It was a book package with a plastic zip cord. When I pulled the cord, acrid white smoke billowed out. I remember the hiss and a strange smell. Welcome in, everybody. Hello, Kronos. Moments later, a terrific flash. My first thought was along the lines of, bombs must be going off all over campus this morning. It is a strange thought, but I assumed I had to be part of a large-scale event. It didn't occur to me that I could possibly have been singled out as a target. Good. Thank you very much, Skullman. After the explosion and that acrid white smoke, Gellinter made his way to the bathroom to wash something out of his eye because he thought he had got something in it when he realized he was bleeding profusely. Remembering the university health clinic was nearby, he made his way down 5.5 stories on foot. And good thing he did, because the clinic said his blood pressure was 0 when he arrived, and if he waited for a ride, he would have bled out and died. Ah, interesting, Mamgzalku. Yes, if you get a package, you pull a cord and start smoking, please throw it away. Now, he's in the hospital. He's gotten stabilized, he needs to get transferred to the hospital to take care of his hand. Adrenaline, shock, and willpower cannot make up for everything. His right hand was damaged in the explosion. He described it as bones sticking out in all directions and skin crumpled like paper. After being stabilized and moved via ambulance to another location, the topic of surgery for his mangled hand was discussed. Thumb and little finger were gone outright, just missing. Thank you very much, Mr. Hardrind. His middle finger was badly mangled, too. Initially, they planned to amputate most of the arm, but the surgeon was formulating a last-ditch maneuver to salvage what remained of it as a helper hand for his good one. Hello, zombie family. The plan and execution was to stitch up the damaged side by getting the skin from somewhere else, attached to his side for a month. A little surgery and recovery later, he was out of the ICU. And the FBI was waiting to talk and hear everything. Everywhere he visited, everywhere he lectured. Not to mention, they forced the manifesto onto him. They needed to know if he recognized anything in it. How awful of an experience that would be. Being required to read 35,000 words of the man who blew your hand up with the bomb, raving about how technology is bad. There's a hollow irony here that we can reluctantly chuckle at, with the passage of time softening the absurdity of the humor. Hello, Dingus. The Unabomber shows one of the few people in the world who doesn't like computers. Oh yes, Gellinter worked with computers, and that likely painted him as a target. But in spring of 1995, he received a piece of correspondence personally from the Unabomber, the only one to have this honor. This bit of fan mail references Gellinter's 1991 book, Mirror Worlds. In the epilogue, he discusses his worry about the tendencies of computers to bring out the worst in people. It's hypothesized that Kaczynski went to these lengths because his sense of narcissism couldn't bear to be laughed at and made a fool. Ridiculed is an awful fate for a man who fears the world laughing at him like Kaczynski does. I hope you understand now why I did things like make the teddy bear and wear the glasses. It's not just for the giggle or to show how based I am or anything. It's to ridicule him. The Unabomber is a ridiculous, ridiculous figure, not deserving of respect in many regards. It's a symbol of defiance, rather than jovial entertainment that I did it. Now, how do you pick up the pieces of your life and return to some sense of normalcy after that? Going back to work. Mobbed for pictures and questions. The Minecraft intro? That's for the entertainment value. Going back to work, mobbed for pictures, questions, suspicious of every piece of mail and correspondence coming in. Always feeling that you're in the center of a press conference. The answer is, you don't. Not fully. In an act of possible defiance, Gellinter returns to teaching at Yale for a computer science class. His life goes on, learning how to paint and type all over again. I have not watched Bose vs. the World. Huh. I have to look at that. Thank you. So, he's putting pieces back of his life together. You may think how strong he is, but really, in that situation, there is no other option. It's not ideal by any means, but it is what needs to be done. Life goes on, basically. But there exists one place where the opinions of the survivors and their families both intersect and simultaneously do not matter. What are their thoughts on the death penalty once threatened, a result of the Unabomber's plea bargain for life in prison? Regardless of our feelings, the social contract we have signed by participating in society says that justice is to be placed in the hands of the legal system. For better or for worse, The victims have little say in the flavor of justice they receive, and their thoughts on the matter are largely irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. And yet, these are those whose lives were uprooted, marred, or even cut short by the act. In many ways, their opinions do not matter. It's harsh, but that's true. The opinions of victims don't matter in many ways. But for tonight, let's make them matter once more. We're going to give light to these words. They said it once, they wanted the world to know it. I'm going to breathe new life into them and let the world know them again tonight. Begin with one of the victims who's been most vocal. A familiar name. David Gellinter, right here, right up on the screen. You remember Gellinter was a Yale University computer science professor, one who unfortunately is part of his right hand. With regards to the prosecution and plea deal, he thought well enough of them, saying they got the best deal they could. But to get a plea deal and land the Unabomber squarely in prison for life, the death penalty had to be given up. Gellinter had this to say on the matter. Kaczynski flicks away lives the way you flick ants off a picnic table. If outraged justice doesn't grab us like a fist from the inside and force us to kill a man like that, we might as well face it. The dignity of human life means nothing to us anymore. It means nothing. Zero. We are only going through the motions of justice, reading a script from a book, mouthing the words, comprehending nothing. In a different interview, he said, "My feelings are mixed. In the short term, it's a relief not to have to go to Sacramento and have to testify. In a deeper sense, deep sadness. I'm less outraged than saddened about the moral state of the country. If we can't get a death penalty in a case like this, I think this is a moral catastrophe for the country. Consider for yourselves if the thoughts of one who personally lost and suffered at the hand of another should hold a different amount of weight." That's one person. Was this indicative of a pattern? Let's move on to another who lost something, except this person was never the recipient of a bomb. We have a statement from Connie Murray, wife of Gilbert Murray, the official with the California Forestry Association who was killed at the hands of the Unabomber. His final bomb, bomb number 16. An FBI chaplain relayed this on behalf of Ms. Murray, describing Mr. Kaczynski as a cold, calculated killer with no remorse. He said, "Mr. Kaczynski fits the definition of a serial killer, and this was definitely a death penalty case. Mr. Kaczynski saw loopholes in the system. His manipulation of the system was very visible. What justice can there be for the loss of life? And can family and loved ones speak for the deceased? Probably a question that's far beyond the scope of what we can possibly talk about in a space like this. The music in the background, music is by Mew. Very quickly. I get my music from... You can Google that name. I think it's in the description. It's free-use music by him. It's one thing to hear what the survivors have to say in interviews when the cauldron of emotions has come to a simmer. But what about when it's a 90-minute session in federal court in Sacramento, where the eyewitnesses and widows of the deceased tell the world what it was like experiencing the attacks firsthand? Susan Mosser is the widow of Thomas Mosser, the New Jersey advertising executive who died at the hands of a mail bomb delivered to their home with children present. It wasn't sent to his workplace. It was sent to his home that had his kids inside. He opened it in their kitchen. They had 4 children, the youngest being 15 months old. December 10th, 1994, was the day they were meant to go shopping for their Christmas tree after Thomas had been away for a week on business. Susan Mosser does have an account of hearing the explosion from another room, the sight of Thomas lying on the floor, her trying to assist her husband in dialing 911, and the realization that he had died and their children no longer had a father. But we understand. I'm not here to scare and shock you with all the details and play to the pathos. What I want to share is what they have to say to the world. With time to carefully deliberate, prepare, and choose her statement, Susan Mosser had this to say to that federal court. My children began their life sentence without their father 3.5 years ago. For the baby, it's a 70-year sentence. For Abby, Tim, and Kim, maybe 50 years. Kaczynski will do less than that. He has ravaged my children, but will suffer less time for it. But while the past is troubling, the future troubles me too. Even in jail, a serial killer wants to kill, and Kaczynski will use his manipulative mind to try and figure out how, if he hasn't already. He is a diabolical, evil, conniving murderer. He has no cause except his own. That is, to kill anyone. Please, Your Honor, make the sentence bulletproof, bomb-proof, if you will. Don't let Kaczynski murder justice the way he has murdered others. Please keep this creature out of society, forever, in every way possible. Make this sentence as permanent for him as he has made ours, Tom's and the others. His so-called causes are smokescreen for his only objective, to kill anything that is alive. Lock him so far down that when he does die, he'll be closer to hell. That's where the devil belongs. Despite the discontentment with the death penalty being taken off the table, the victims and families still decided to agree to the guilty plea in exchange for life in prison when they were presented with it. The prosecution accepted the plea after consulting with the victims and families. And so, the case was brought to an end with a whimper rather than a bang. A build-up 2 decades in the making and suddenly finished. No cameras in the courtroom, no jury trial and prolonged media spotlight, no verdict to be handed down as people glue themselves to TVs and radios. Just the end of that chapter in history brought to a close. Susan Mosser had this to say in a later interview. Nothing will bring closure. Nothing will end the pain. I was dead for a long time. I felt that way. Then I realized I didn't die. It was Tom. I had to live. My children deserve a life and a future. That is the end of our lesson on the Unabomber. Alright. Now, the mood can come back up now, alright? Everybody, the mood can come back up. Look! Look! Dogs with hats! Dogs with hats, look at them! Are you happy yet? Are you happy now? Smile, smile, feel good. Sorry for that. I would not be doing my moral duty if the entire evening was laughs and giggles, because the truth is, this is a somber topic that deserves its reverence when talking about the lives shaken by it. But like all events in history, the passage of time softens the blow. Edges are rounded out, become less coarse. My thoughts are pretty mixed about what I've done. Pretty much about CCRU, I have not. On the whole, I'm proud that I can stream and create the specific flavored content that no one else can or will do, but that may not be the case anymore. I've noted before that this sort of thing would be more appropriate as a podcast or a YouTube video, but I'm here on Twitch live streaming, so oh well. I really just did a live version of the video essay, didn't I? Yeah. The other part that gives me a sense of caution is if I painted a target on myself. A low profile and innocuous content means that I am largely immune to any serious criticism. Not the case anymore. This may be referenced for a long while if one is to seek out any issues with me or what I do. Again, oh well. This is me and what I want to do. The real VTuber I am. My real content. Don't you ever forget what I am. Understood? I've noted this stream as being the first entry of Understand Evil, but I don't know how this is going to be received past this evening, so I will see if people truly want more. Please understand this takes months of preparation. I mulled the idea and direction for a while, before going hard on the writing paint at the beginning of the year. Oh, Aegon, this is the after-credits scene. Just hold on for a sec. You could consider the torture stream as the primordial form of Understand Evil, and the cannibalism stream as lesson number 0. What direction do I go in from here? Well, I actually know the answer already. I want to talk about an evil that permeates the world in a much more subdued way than mail bombings. The symptom of systemic disease, rather than an extremist outlier. I teased or even said outright what today would entail at the end of the cannibalism lesson, and I will continue the tradition for you all now. As a reward for staying with me, consider this a blessing from your doctor for being present. Now, the subject of our next lesson will be... Alright. Thank you. Now, if you excuse me, I have to go pick up a package.